Mexico 1970 was a World Cup of firsts. The first to be held outside Europe or South America. The first time the tournament was broadcast live in colour. But it was also a last look at the Jules Rimet trophy, because by lifting it for the third time, Brazil would keep it forever. It was arguably the greatest World Cup, won by perhaps the greatest team.
It's a story that I have to thank God for, because it's such a great story, very emotional.
Goodison Park, England, 1966. Brazil were looking to win their third successive World Cup, but a 3-1 defeat to Portugal dumped them out of the tournament at the first stage.
Brazilian football isn't violent by nature, and so we didn't know how to play hard like the Europeans. They would play hard but fair. That wasn't in our nature. So from that point on, a plan was put into action that gave more value to our physical preparation, because the next World Cup was in Mexico, where we'd have to play at altitude. And if we wanted to win the title, then we knew we'd have to give a bit more to our physical preparations. And that's what happened.
In response to the perceived failure, their 1958 winning manager Vicente Fiola was dismissed, but his replacement, Aimore Moreira, lasted just 2 years. Finally, in 1969 came the appointment of João Saldanha.
Saldanha had his own style. In the qualifiers in 1969, he said, "This is my team. Players will only get dropped if they play really badly or get injured." So I think I only played in one of the qualifiers.
Brazil won all 6 of their qualification matches, but the campaign was not trouble-free. The new manager refused to select personal favourites of Brazilian President General Medici, and had also considered dropping Pelé. For Saldanha, it was not the end of the controversy.
Saldanha was a temperamental guy. He'd go after any of the journalists who criticized his side. His great error came when he received some heavy criticism from Flamengo's coach, Ustrich. He then went after Ustrich with a gun, trying to shoot him. The president of the Brazilian FA, João Havelange, decided to remove him from his post. That's when Zagallo was chosen.
Mario Zagallo had played in Brazil's previous 2 World Cup triumphs. His hero status was therefore assured, as was his confidence in his own ability.
That team was known as Saldanha's Beasts, so Zagallo made a few changes, got them playing in his style, put his tactical scheme in place, and brought the team together.
I made various changes. I put Piazza at the back, who was normally a midfielder. Clodoaldo and Rivellino were on the bench, but I put both of them in the first team. Chasteu played a lot deeper, so I put him right up front. Everyone tracked back and defended as a team, and when we attacked well, with Rivellino, Gerson, Pelé, Jairzinho on the right wing, and our right back, Carlos Alberto. And so we were left with 3 at the back, Everaldo, who was left back, Piazza, and Brito.
It was a Brazilian squad bristling with attacking talent. The team was captained by Santos right-back Carlos Alberto, but it was a Santos teammate who remained the star attraction. A man who had won the World Cup twice already, the most famous footballer on the planet, Pelé.
In 58, all I wanted to do was play. I didn't have that pressure of people telling me I had to win or I had to play well. But after playing in 62 and 66, where I was injured, 1970 was extremely difficult for me because there was a lot of pressure. Brazil had its own problems with a military dictatorship in power at the time, and the political situation was rather confused. I'd thought about quitting. President Havelange, who was with FIFA but Brazilian, tried convincing me to play. I said, I'll go, but it will be my last World Cup.
The tournament began in May 1970, and the task facing Brazil was all too clear. In Group 3, they faced 3 European sides.
England, who were the holders, Czechoslovakia, who became European champions, and Romania, the new European sensations. We left the country with everyone thinking Brazil wouldn't even get through their group.
We prepared for 21 days in Guanajuato, which is at the same altitude as Mexico City. So, our preparation was done scientifically and already with the aim of winning the title. But we ended up playing our games in Guadalajara, which is only 1,600 meters, practically at sea level.
Before the tournament began, we couldn't be too sure of ourselves. We had to go out and play to show that the work we'd put in was going to give us results. And I remember we went a goal down in that game against Czechoslovakia, even though the game was well balanced.
With just over 20 minutes played, Pelé won a free kick on the edge of the area. Up stepped Roberto Rivellino.
Technically, it's hard to even talk about how good he was. He played for Corinthians, which is the most popular team in Sao Paulo. The Corinthians fans loved him. They called him the kid from the park, the little king.
He was known as the atomic shot as he struck the ball so hard.
Brazil took charge, and so did Pelé. Gerson set up the number 10 for his first goal of the tournament, and from then on, the result was never in doubt.
That's a dream, a real privilege to play with guys like that. So much creativity and ability to start attacks. I won't mention Pelé, he's not on quite the same level, as he was from a different planet, so he's not allowed in this contest.
As the Czechs tired, Jairzinho scored twice. His second was one of the goals of the tournament, and collectively it was a team performance which sent out a warning. The Brazilians were winning the hearts and minds of the Mexican fans, but the same could not be said for their next opponent, England. Sir Alf Ramsey's men were still the reigning world champions, and as such would provide the stiffest of tests.
They had kept most of that side together, although now they had 4 more years' experience and had some great players like Gordon Banks, Bobby Moore and Bobby Charlton. Beating England would firstly mean staying in Guadalajara, as the first team in the group would play their next games there. But if we finished second, we'd have to play our next match at altitude, and against who? An excellent West German side.
We played our normal game, but we took into account England's physical prowess and their individual ability. They marked well, they were quick, good in the air, which is one of English football's main strong points. I think I lost nearly 5 kilos playing in that game. After the game, we had to take on a special diet.
That game to me was probably the most outstanding international football match that I was involved in. The game itself was just everything that you could expect from a football match.
But the national team was in great shape, and so much so that in the second half of games in Guadalajara, we were always better than in the first.
And so it proved. On the hour mark, Brazil finally broke the deadlock. Jairzinho scored the only goal of the match.
It was like a game of chess. We could have lost 1-0, or drawn, or won 1-0. It was a sensational game, played in the head, which we were lucky enough to win.
The pressure had been partially lifted heading into the final group match against Romania. Brazil won 3-2, with goals from Pelé either side of Jairzinho to win their group with maximum points.
We were so happy because we hadn't lost a game and would stay in Guadalajara right up to the semi-final. By staying there, we didn't have to move around the country. It was great for us.
Their opponents in the quarter-final were fellow South Americans Peru, and in the opposite dugout was a very familiar face. Didi had won 2 World Cups with Brazil. Now he'd guided a talented Peru to the runners-up spot in their group.
Didi was considered one of the best coaches in Brazil. He knew exactly how we played. We knew how difficult it would be, and it was difficult beating Peru, even though we felt we were at a higher level than them.
This time it was Rivellino's turn to lead the charge. He opened the scoring after just 11 minutes, then 4 minutes later turned provider for Tostão.
Our best player, tactically speaking, was Tostão. He took on the 2 main markers, which then freed up Pelé and Rivellino. And that's what helped the movement in our team. And being so well prepared, no one could stop us.
Peru scored twice themselves, but were powerless against Brazil's front 5, all of whom it seemed were at the peak of their powers.
Jairzinho, Gerson, Rivellino, Pelé, Tostão. To have a team with 5 aces like that, in a deck of cards you only get 4. But that national team had 5 aces who were all exceptional players. So it was amazing to be able to play, look up, and see those 5 players in front of you. It was really incredible.
Brazil's semi-final berth was secure and confidence was high, but that confidence was about to be tested by a familiar foe. 2 decades earlier, Brazil had been defeated by neighbours Uruguay in a World Cup final at their very own Maracanã, and they suffered an inferiority complex that lasted 20 years. The Uruguay defeat led to the national team not playing at all for 2 years, and eventually saw them change their original white shirts to the now famous yellow.
Brazil fans would come to our hotel, and everyone would be talking about the game in 1950. Would the same thing happen again? And I think psychologically, that had a negative influence on our morale.
It showed. Brazil began nervously. Uruguay took a shock lead.
I remember their commentator from the sporting radio station of Montevideo started going crazy, as if they'd won the game. He turned around and faced us and said, "We're going to beat you again."
Despite their ability, the Brazilian attack struggled to break down the meanest defense in South America.
The brains behind our team was Gerson. He was an incredible player, and he commanded the team just as he did at Botafogo. Everything came through him. But the Uruguay coach was the only one in that World Cup who realized that fact. So he stuck a player on Gerson to be his shadow. Not right on top of him, but enough for him to go wherever Gerson went, so he wouldn't pass him the ball.
It was down to a 6th member of the team to take centre stage, Clodoaldo.
I scored 1 goal in that World Cup against Uruguay, and I thought it was I'm trying to think of how best to say it. A big risk that I took. A player like me to get up the pitch and score with those 5 guys in front of me but that's what happened. And it happened because one of the five told me to do it. That was Gerson. He told me to get forward more in that game.
We had several leaders. We had very mature players. It was a team who knew how to do things. It was only in the game against Uruguay where at half-time I had to give them a good talking to. I had to motivate them.
We couldn't disappoint the Brazilian people again when they were expecting so much more. He really tried to make us emotional so that each one of us got goosebumps listening to him.
Zagallo's words had the desired effect. Jairzinho gave Brazil the lead with 15 minutes remaining, and any further doubt was removed when Rivellino sealed a 3-1 win. And in the closing minutes, Pelé still had time for something special.
We always said that Pelé's thought process was so quick, that he was several seconds quicker than the rest of us. When you stopped to think about what he was about to do, he'd already done it. His thinking and his overall movement was just so fast. I don't think there will ever be a player as perfect as he was.
The Brazilians had again reached the World Cup final, and a nation rejoiced. Only one more challenge remained, and it was posed by Italy. Both nations had won 2 previous World Cups, and if any added incentive were needed, the winners of this one would get to keep the trophy.
I saw all those Brazilians and Mexicans with the Brazil flag shouting, "Brazil, Pelé!" It just made me well up. I wanted to stop crying, but I couldn't. I tried to hide it as I was the oldest and most experienced player. And I didn't want the other players to think, why is he crying?
Italy had a great team. Just the way in which they played, especially their marking. They liked to man-mark and go wherever their man went. That was a big mistake against a top team. Not just against Brazil, but any other decent side. There was a lot of movement from our players, so that we would interfere with their marking.
After a tentative start, Brazil's tactics paid off, and the scorer of his nation's 100th World Cup goal was a surprise to no one.
I'd scored a header against Sweden in my very first World Cup. And then I scored again with my head in my farewell game against Italy as a world champion. So, that was marvellous.
In 70, it seemed that he prepared himself for an honourable farewell, worthy of Pelé. And he had an incredible World Cup, and deservedly so, because he was the greatest player in the world.
He had such charisma on the pitch, and he was also able to get away from his marker very easily. We'd always have 1 or 2 people stuck on him, but then you'd look up and see that he'd stolen 4 yards on his marker and think, how did he do that? But that's a trademark of a great player, and there were no greater than him.
But Brazil's high lasted only until the 37th minute, when an error from Clodoaldo led to an Italian equaliser. Brazil had to regroup and stick to the game plan.
Brazil's aim was to keep possession of the ball. That's what we always tried to do anyway, but we tried to do it even more in that game to try and exhaust the Italians. And we really felt that we'd done that in the second half. When we started to knock the ball around, we felt that Italy no longer had the energy to mark us in the way that Italian teams normally did.
Midway through the second half, Gerson restored Brazil's lead.
It's not that we didn't respect Italy, but if you analyse the game, then you can see it was Brazil's easiest game of the tournament. It could have been 5 or 6-1 to Brazil, but it was a game that rewarded that national team. Only that national team could have put on a show like that.
5 minutes later, Gerson found Pelé, who found Jairzinho. The number 7 scored his 7th goal in 6 games, making him the first player to score in every match of a World Cup, a record lasting more than 40 years.
Jairzinho was a very strong player, and he just enjoyed a perfect World Cup. I don't think you could give him any less than a 10 out of 10 because he was fantastic. He was always waiting for the ball from Rivellino, Gerson, Tostão and Pelé. And he was fantastic even next to those absolute monsters of football. And yet he proved to be another monster of Brazilian football in 1970. Jairzinho, the Hurricane. That's how he's known after that, the Hurricane, because of the great World Cup he had in 1970.
As the full-time whistle loomed, Brazil then produced something truly special. To this day, their final strike is fondly remembered as perhaps the greatest team goal of all time. All bar 2 of the team were directly involved, and fittingly, it would be finished by their captain.
Zagallo had planned that move. He showed to us before the game that we could do that move. Not at any moment, but just once or twice.
The ball goes out to the left. It starts with me in midfield. They tried to get the ball off me, but once they couldn't do that, as we passed the ball up the pitch, it was as if Italy sat back and were paralyzed.
He dribbled past 3 or 4 Italians and then passed to me. And Jairzinho ran round the back of my marker on the left, and so I passed it to Jairzinho.
Jairzinho moved inside, and so I saw Fischetti move inside with him too. When that happened, I knew that Carlos Alberto would be on the overlap. All I had to do was control it and roll it to the side as I knew what was happening. I didn't even look. I didn't need to look behind me to know that Carlos Alberto was making the run. I controlled it and I passed it because we'd done it in training. And it worked. It was a fantastic move.
I remembered what Zagallo had said. When Jairzinho gave it to Pelé, I was well over the halfway line as I knew Pelé would roll it to me. For me, it was great as I was lucky enough to score our 4th goal, and even today, everyone talks about it.
If you watch the goal, it hits a bobble, and Carlos Alberto meets it in full flight to score a great goal. But the move as a whole was beautiful. Only that team could have scored that goal. It'll be very difficult to ever see a national team, whether it's Brazil or another country, produce that sort of football in a final again.
In my opinion, it's the best goal in World Cup history.
The full-time whistle confirmed a 4-1 victory and cued mass celebrations. For some, the emotion was simply overwhelming.
It was a group effort. That was the important thing. It didn't depend on any one player, and that's what was great about it. Even Pelé, who was the greatest player I ever saw and the athlete of the century, was part of that team ethic.
We went through all the qualifiers for the 1970 World Cup unbeaten. We didn't lose a single game, and we won every single game we played in that World Cup too. We won the World Cup without losing a game. As a team, we were fantastic.
As captain of the 1970 team, after scoring in that game, to receive the trophy in the name of Brazilian football, and also to keep the Jules Rimet trophy for good, that was just something unforgettable for me. Today, anywhere I go in the world, people still call me captain.
There's a feeling of job done or mission accomplished for your country. Lifting the World Cup trophy and thinking of your people and your country is just fantastic.
I've got a portrait of me crying at home. I've got a lot. But crying is good. Winning is good. Because I won't cry if we're losing. If you cry, it means everything's gone well.
Mario Zagallo became the first man to win the trophy as a player and as a manager. He returned in 1998 to lead Brazil to another final. Of the team that started that final in Mexico, only Piazza, Rivellino and Jairzinho would play in the next World Cup. 1970 would forever remain the high point for all involved.
That team of 1970 was the best Brazil side ever.
Without any doubt, it was the World Cup of my life. I'd finished my international career with 3 World Cup wins and the Jules Rimet Trophy. Did I want to start all over again? I just said no. Better to end my career at the top.
We had great players, fantastic players. Even today, that national team is considered the greatest team of all time. It was a team that dazzled the world.